us, and may it speed through quickly.
I apologise to the member, the time has expired. I call Marama Davidson.
Tēnā koe e te māngai o te whare. Tēnā hoki koutou oku whanaunga o te tai rāwhiti o Ngāti Porou hoki. Really pleased to finally be at the second reading stage after quite a lengthy submission process and working out from the submissions then the exact changes that needed to be made to the bill so that we are able to arrive and report back from it. And as the Deputy Chair of the Māori Affairs Select Committee, a massive mihi papa apirana mahuika was right through to the end, absolutely visionary. And this is where we have come to be able to pick up the work, which was also the work of ex-Minister Chris Finlayson, to bring this bill to the House. It's had quite a bit of a background, and my colleagues have talked about how there was a deed of agreement, 2004, there was the Foreshore and Seabed Act, which was repealed and replaced. The deed then had to be amended to fit into the new legislation, and this is what we are debating and pushing through the House today. If we go back to the purpose, this is about affirming what has always been, really, the kaitiaki, the mana motuhake and sovereignty, care, responsibilities that Ngāti Porou, Ngā Hapū, or Ngāti Porou have always had. And this was the visionary step that Papa Api was taking, and taking Hapū alongside to put this legislation in place. Quite historical. The only legislation like it that actually manages to carve out specific responsibilities and empowers iwi and affirms iwi with what they already had, to be able to have some responsibility over the longevity of the Rohe Moana, over protecting in a way that protects the ecosystem, the food systems, the entire environment for many generations to come. And that really is part of the purpose of this bill. It's a legal expression, protection and recognition of the continued exercise of mana by Ngā Hapū o Ngāti Porou in relation to Ngā Rohe Moana o Ngā Hapū o Ngāti Porou. And so I wanted to bring all of the discussions back to the actual purpose of the bill. We had a fantastic day in Kaiti, the Māori Affairs Select Committee, travelling to Gisborne to hear from a packed community, very passionate kōrero, because, you know, I was thinking back to the visions as we were sitting there, endowed with the waiata and the kōrero and the history of everyone in that room and everyone who they brought with them, tūpuna gone before us, and everyone's not just in the room, but upholding the ahika fires as well. So I was thinking back to that room, the passionate, deeply felt kōrero, protection of hapū boundaries, rongo whakata and others, making sure that they're heard, all voices, making sure that they're heard, and wanting to acknowledge that day you were absolutely heard. There were many stories, there were concerns, and there were ways to reaffirm people's reassure people also in some of the fears and valid concerns that were raised. So that was another of these very privileged days that you get to have as an MP on that Māori Affairs Select Committee. And of course, alongside all of those submissions, we heard from industry voices like Eastland Port and New Zealand Rock Lobster Industry Council. And I think I just wanted to pick up a bit on those submissions. I know Honourable Chris Finlayson also expanded on that in a lot more detail, but I think I wanted to get, through the submission process, I wanted to get a sense of understanding where, obviously, so iwi consent, which is right, iwi consent will be required for resource consent applications in areas over which it has customary title, as well as for proposals such as marine reserves. Now, there were naturally going to be some concerns raised. For example, Tairāwhiti Rock Lobster Industry Association said at the time, if the bill was passed, it would provide opportunities for significant closures of areas impacting on the industry. And so if we go into section 13 of the bill, which is about the preservation of certain rights and accommodated matters, and I think even further into some of the other sections, it really is about, see, Māori are considered, well-researched, well-informed, know their stuff, Ngāti Porou, and so we're more than aware of the sorts of considerations that we're going to have to take place in pushing through this legislation. And so I did want to pick up on one comment, though, that was from Tairāwhiti Rock Lobster Industry, where it said, how does 70 years of fishing not count as use and occupation? How is use and occupation measured? And I feel quite comfortable saying they may now sympathise or empathise somewhat a little bit with centuries and centuries of occupation and use and kaitiaki responsibilities, and hopefully can remain aware of the generosity with which Ngāti Porou have actually progressed this legislation with consideration and accommodation of those interests, which is not exactly what was done to Māori in the processes of colonisation and land removal. So I welcome this bill and the considerate way that it is upholding all of the interests. Not only for the purposes of celebrating the passage of this bill, I did want to say that, yes, of course, when we're talking about land and moana and whenua and Māori customary rights, we're going to attract some of the lesser tasteful kind of submission, and we didn't attract many. And I just wanted to highlight that it actually went to the, there was a good tenor of conversation when the Māori Affairs Select Committee, we actually rejected one of the submissions on the grounds that it was offensive. And there was, you know, this wasn't a big, there weren't a lot of those, but I just wanted to say that it was very easy for us to be able to keep the tenor of the conversation focused on the issues, balancing various accommodated matters, and we were absolutely dismissive, if I can say it, of some of the quite racist views that came into the Māori Affairs Select Committee, but that was just a little bit. I then wanted to move, and oh gosh, I really, yep, I've got 2 minutes. I really wanted to pick up one of the big changes, well, yes, one of the major changes was the discussion between Te Whānau Iri Te Kura and Te Whānau Te Ao Tawarirangi boundaries. What I really appreciated was it became obvious in the bill that there was a bit of a mix-up with those boundaries. Both hapū met, and it concerned Koutu Nui Point down the coast. Both hapū met and agreed that we would shift and name the boundaries to be more appropriate. And that was good because immediately on the Māori Affairs Select Committee, we thought, okay, so that this actually needs to be put right. The advisors here in Parliament absolutely agreed. There were discussions between all parties, and an agreement was reached. And I did want to sort of make quite a big deal out of that change, because it's why it's so important that people have these ancestral connections and these histories to make sure that we're doing our job right in this place. It was so important, for example, that there was acknowledgement that both Te Whānau Iri Te Kura and Te Whānau Te Ao Tawarirangi have ancestral connections to the place Tengotu o Kore, and that they would continue to share, according to tikanga, the responsibilities and the guardianship responsibilities to uphold those whenua and those Rohe Moana. So there was a, you know, those of us on the committee were quite familiar with the map down the coast there, and that there needed to be a shift of around Koutu Nui. There's a difference between Koutu Nui Point and Koutu Nui Head, and I think that was just a genuine mistake to begin with. But actually, the outcome was that we had some fantastic affirmations and conversations about overreaching into Rohe Moana of different hapū. So I think that was actually really positive and a good learning experience for all of us. All in all, we'll go through to the third reading, and really looking forward to cementing this properly in this House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Ko Dan Bidwa.
Tēnā koe e te mana whakawā.